In the quiet hum beneath our chaos, there exists a rhythm, not loud, but certain, guiding every storm, every silence, every soul we encounter. We are not here by accident, nor are the people we meet simply characters in passing. Each carries a mirror, a lesson, a divine tension woven into the architecture of our becoming. Even the toxic ones, especially the toxic ones, are part of the choreography. They arrive not to derail us, but to reveal us. Emotionally intelligent people do not fight the dissonance, they listen to it. They understand that life is not just made of harmony, but of discordant notes that make the music whole. They outsmart not through ego, but through presence, not by overpowering, but by remaining rooted in the stillness beneath reaction, because sometimes the most powerful act isn't resistance, it's recognition. And in that quiet recognition, we begin to see even the conflict was a part of the calling. There's something fascinating about human behavior, especially the parts we tend to label as toxic. You see, most of us, when we're caught in the middle of someone's hostility, manipulation, or criticism, tend to get stuck on the person in front of us. We assign blame, give them names, play scenes over and over in our heads. But emotionally intelligent people, the ones who navigate these moments with grace and strength, don't fixate on people. They see patterns, and that changes everything. Because when you begin to look beyond the person, beyond the tone of their voice, the cutting words, the passive aggression, you start to realize that you're not facing a unique villain. You're facing a behavior that follows a script. One that's likely been repeated in different rooms with different names long before you stepped into the story. Emotional intelligence invites us to rise above the personal and see the pattern, and that shift moves us from reaction to awareness. Think about it. When someone is consistently dismissive of your ideas or undermines your confidence in subtle ways, it's tempting to think, what's wrong with them? Why are they doing this to me? But emotionally intelligent people don't stop there. They ask deeper questions. Where have I seen this before? What story is being played out here, and what part am I unconsciously rehearsing? This doesn't mean they tolerate the behavior. It means they recognize it. They name it, they observe it like a recurring melody that plays in the background of certain conversations. The kind of tune that, once you've heard it clearly, can no longer manipulate you into dancing along. This kind of recognition is powerful, because when you see a pattern, you can predict its next move, and when you can predict it, you can choose not to participate. You begin to notice how toxic behavior often masks insecurity. You notice how control is a cover for fear, how criticism is sometimes a poor attempt to feel superior, and instead of internalizing that behavior, instead of thinking, maybe I'm not good enough, you start seeing, this is about them, not me. There's a kind of freedom in that. Not a loud, rebellious freedom, but a quiet, sturdy one, the kind that doesn't need to defend or attack, but simply steps back and says, I've seen this before, I know what this is, and I don't have to lose myself inside it. Emotionally intelligent people don't take toxic behavior personally, not because they're numb or detached, but because they've trained their minds to rise above the surface drama and tune into the deeper rhythm. They see how these patterns often repeat across generations, cultures, offices, and families. They know that most people act out of habit, not intention, out of pain, not malice, and so they stay calm. Not because they're unaffected, but because they've done the inner work to understand what's really happening. They've learned to pause, to breathe, to observe without absorbing. You've probably met someone like this. Someone who could stand in the middle of a storm and still not flinch. Not because they're cold, but because they've learned that their peace is not negotiable. They've watched enough patterns play out to know that not everything deserves a reaction. Not every provocation deserves a reply. And that's how they outsmart toxicity, not with clever comebacks or dominance, but with awareness, with restraint, with wisdom. You can do this too. It's not about being passive, it's about being precise. When you know what's happening, you don't need to prove anything. You just choose differently. Toxic people thrive on chaos. They feed off reaction. But when you stop reacting, when you learn to read the pattern and not the personality, you take away the oxygen. The fire dies down not because you extinguished it, but because you stopped fueling it. You begin to live on your own terms, not in defense but in design. So the next time you find yourself pulled into a moment that feels familiar, a confrontation, a guilt trip, a subtle jab, don't just look at the person, look at the pattern, ask yourself, *, what is this really about? Where have I heard this music before? *, and then decide. *, do I want to keep dancing to it? *, because real power is not in how loudly we speak, but in how deeply we listen. An emotional intelligence. It doesn't make you invincible. It makes you aware. * and awareness, when practiced with courage, becomes a kind of quiet brilliance, the kind that outshines even the darkest noise. * there's a moment, and we've all felt it, when someone says something cruel, calculated, or completely unfair, and something inside us tightens. Our body stiffens, our chest warms, our ego flares up like a match struck too fast. That moment right there is the invitation. It's the test, not of how clever we are, not of how dominant or witty or sharp-tongued we can be, but of how present we're willing to remain. Because when emotionally intelligent people encounter toxic behavior, they don't meet fire with fire. They meet it with stillness. It's a counterintuitive strength, this kind of presence. Our culture often confuses leadership with loudness, reaction with strength. We admire quick replies, bold rebuttals, and being the last voice in the room. But real emotional intelligence isn't reactive, it's responsive. And there's a difference. Reaction is fast, instinctive, and usually fueled by ego. It wants to be seen, to be right, to win. But response is slow, intentional. It comes from somewhere deeper than the ego. It comes from a place of clarity. Emotionally intelligent people have trained themselves to return to that place, not always perfectly, they're human too, but often enough that you'll notice something different about the way they move through conflict. They don't raise their voice just because someone else does. They don't scramble to justify themselves when they're misunderstood. They don't take the bait, and that's what toxic people want, for you to take the bait. For you to mirror their chaos, but emotional intelligence refuses to play that game. Instead of defending their ego, they protect their peace. And here's what's remarkable, that peace isn't passive, it's incredibly active. It takes discipline, it takes courage, because when you're insulted, when you're dismissed, when someone distorts your words or questions your intentions, everything in your nervous system screams for retaliation. But presence, true presence, is the decision to remain rooted in yourself, even as everything around you tries to shake you loose. It's easy to be calm when things are calm, but the real work is staying grounded when someone else is unraveling in front of you. That doesn't mean letting others walk over you. This isn't about becoming a doormat or tolerating abuse. Presence doesn't mean silence, it means not losing your center. You can speak with clarity, you can say no, you can name what's harmful, but you don't have to meet venom with venom. Emotionally intelligent people understand that staying calm isn't weakness, it's strategy. When someone tries to drag you into a reactive state, they're trying to pull you onto their battlefield where they know the terrain. But when you remain present, you stay on your ground, a ground they can't control. There's something disarming about that. When someone throws emotional fire at you and it lands on cool stone instead of dry leaves, they don't know what to do with that. The cycle breaks, the tension has nowhere to feed. You don't shrink and you don't explode. You simply remain, and in that remaining there's power. The world tells us to match energy, but emotional intelligence teaches us to choose our own. Just because someone's loud doesn't mean we need to shout. Just because someone's cruel doesn't mean we become cold. Matching energy might feel satisfying in the short term, but it rarely creates the long-term outcomes we actually want. It's not about being above anyone, it's about being anchored within yourself. Presence invites us to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. The thermometer reacts to the environment, the thermostat sets it. And here's the thing, when we learn to respond with presence instead of reacting with ego, something else happens. We begin to feel less drained. We no longer carry conversations with us for hours or days, rehashing what we could have said or should have done. Because we didn't lose ourselves, we stayed. And when you stay with yourself, you walk away in peace, no matter how loud the moment was. That's what emotional intelligence makes possible. A kind of quiet dignity in the midst of noise. A calm strength that doesn't need to prove itself, because it already knows what it's rooted in. You'll still feel hurt sometimes, you'll still get triggered, but when your presence is stronger than your ego, those moments won't define you. You'll breathe, you'll choose, you'll remain. And maybe that's the most powerful thing you can do in a world constantly trying to pull you away from yourself. Because sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the one that doesn't need to raise itself at all. We often think of boundaries as walls, sharp, rigid, cold, like armor we put on after we've been hurt too many times. But emotionally intelligent people understand something much deeper. Boundaries aren't weapons, and they're not punishments. They're not about shutting people out. They're about choosing what kind of energy we allow in. Setting boundaries isn't about control, it's about clarity, and clarity isn't cruel, it's kind. It's what gives relationships shape. Without it, we blur, we overextend, we become versions of ourselves that are too accommodating, too stretched, too quiet. We say yes when we mean no. We smile when something aches inside. We absorb behavior we know is wrong, simply because we haven't found the words or the worth to protect our peace. Emotionally intelligent people don't just build boundaries, they embody them. Their tone, their posture, their presence, it communicates what they stand for without shouting. They don't need to slam doors, they simply stop walking through the ones that lead them to harm, because here's the truth, you can be kind and still be clear. You can be compassionate and still say, this doesn't work for me. You can love someone and still choose to love yourself more in the places where their behavior becomes damaging. That's the part that confuses many people, especially those who expect your silence. Because when you begin to set healthy boundaries, the people who benefited from your lack of them will call you selfish, difficult, cold. They will say you've changed, and you have. You've stopped carrying what was never yours. You've stopped letting guilt be your guide. But emotional intelligence doesn't react to guilt, it listens to wisdom. It asks, is this request aligned with who I want to be? It asks, what does love look like for me, and does this behavior fit into that picture? You see, boundaries aren't about keeping people away. They're about inviting in only what aligns. They help you discern who adds to your peace and who subtracts from it. They help you show up fully, not out of obligation, but out of truth. And perhaps most importantly, boundaries protect the version of you that you've worked so hard to become. Think about it, you've grown, you've healed, you've stayed up late doing the hard inner work. You've learned to breathe through triggers, to respond, not react, to stay present when it would have been easier to shut down. That version of you deserves protection, and not just from the world, but sometimes from people you love. Emotionally intelligent people know that love without boundaries becomes self-betrayal, that peace without protection is temporary. They know that a kind no can preserve far more than a forced yes. It's not easy, though, because many of us were raised to believe that being good means being agreeable, that love means sacrifice, even if the sacrifice is yourself. So when you begin to shift, when you begin to set boundaries, it can feel foreign, even wrong, but it's not wrong, it's right, sized living. It's choosing alignment over approval, and over time, you start to feel the shift. You realize you're less exhausted, less resentful, less anxious after interactions that used to drain you. That's the quiet reward of boundaries. They return you to yourself. They create space for your own voice to echo louder than the noise around you. Emotionally intelligent people understand that conflict doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it just means clarity, saying, I care about you, but I can't keep shrinking to fit this dynamic. Saying, I'm available for love, not manipulation. Saying, I don't owe you access to every part of me just because you ask. And that's not selfish. That's sacred. That's what real emotional intelligence makes possible. The ability to love without losing yourself, to stay open without being unguarded, to give generously without bleeding dry. You don't have to explain your boundaries to everyone. You don't need long justifications or emotional essays. A simple, honest "this is what I need to feel safe and respected" is enough. Some people won't accept it, and that's their journey. Yours is to honor what your inner wisdom knows. Because once you've found your worth, once you've met the version of yourself that's been buried beneath years of people, pleasing and overextending, you'll do everything you can to keep her, to protect her, to honor her space. And that's not arrogance, that's reverence, because the moment you begin to protect your peace like it's sacred is the moment it finally becomes so. There's something we don't talk about enough, the quiet wisdom buried inside conflict. We're taught to avoid it, fear it, resent it. We brace for it like a storm we hope will pass, but emotionally intelligent people see something different in those moments of friction. They don't just survive conflict, they use it. They let it sharpen their clarity. It's not that they enjoy confrontation. No one really does. But they've learned to stop running from the discomfort and start listening to what it's revealing. Because every conflict beneath the noise holds a message. And when you meet that message with presence instead of resistance, something powerful begins to unfold. Emotional intelligence teaches us that conflict isn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's about us. Sometimes it's a mirror reflecting our boundaries, our values, or even our fears. The conflict reveals where we're misaligned with others, yes, but more importantly with ourselves. You see, emotionally intelligent people don't use conflict to attack. They use it to clarify. They listen beyond the words, they watch the energy behind the behavior, they pause before reacting, and in that space, that sacred pause, they ask questions most people skip. What is this teaching me? What does this stir inside me? What truth is trying to surface here? Because when you stop seeing conflict as a threat and start seeing it as a teacher, it transforms. It becomes a guidepost, a compass, a prompt to check in with yourself and ask, am I living according to what I truly believe, or am I just trying to keep the peace by abandoning it within myself? That's the deeper work, not learning to win arguments, but learning to let them guide you home to yourself. Emotionally intelligent people don't always agree, but they don't need to. They're not chasing agreement, they're chasing alignment, and that's different. Agreement asks for harmony at any cost. Alignment asks for honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. And here's where the shift happens. When you stop fearing discomfort, you start finding your voice, and not the loud, defensive voice, not the one that snaps or deflects. The real voice, the one that says, this matters to me, or that crossed a line, or I won't continue this conversation if it becomes disrespectful. That voice doesn't emerge in ease. It's forged in friction. In those moments when you're tempted to stay silent, but choose not to, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Conflict gives us the chance to practice that voice, and more than that, it shows us what we care about, what we stand for, what we will and will not carry forward. It also reveals the quality of the relationships we're in. When you raise a concern gently, respectfully, and someone belittles it, deflects it, or turns it back on you, that tells you something. When someone listens, even if they don't agree, when they hold space for your perspective, that tells you something too. Emotionally intelligent people don't avoid these signals. They pay attention. They don't stay stuck in toxic cycles hoping for change without truth. They know that conflict handled with care is a tool for growth, and sometimes a necessary door to closure. The point isn't to seek out conflict. It's to not shy away from it when it knocks. It's to trust that discomfort isn't always danger. Sometimes it's transformation in disguise. When you walk into a room and someone's energy shifts, when you feel the tension rise during a conversation, when a text stings a little more than it should, those aren't accidents, they're invitations. And emotionally intelligent people RSVP with curiosity, not defensiveness. They say, there's something here I need to look at, not just in the other person, but in themselves too. This is how they grow. Not by pretending everything's fine, but by digging beneath the surface and finding what's real. It's in these moments of truth, the ones that shake us a little, that we uncover the most valuable lessons about how we love, how we protect ourselves, how we respond when we're misunderstood, when we're disappointed, when we're afraid of losing connection, and maybe that's the point. Maybe conflict isn't meant to tear us apart. Maybe it's meant to bring us back to ourselves, more honest, more grounded, more awake. Emotionally intelligent people don't run from these moments, they rise to meet them. Not with fury, but with insight, not to fight, but to understand, because the real power in conflict isn't in winning. It's in revealing who we're becoming, And sometimes the deepest clarity comes not in the silence, but in the tension that dares us to finally speak our truth. There's a kind of power that doesn't show up on stage. It's not loud. It doesn't lead with charisma or command a room with presence. It's quieter, slower, far more enduring. It's the power of discernment, the ability to see through behavior, to notice patterns, to read the emotional undercurrents that most people miss. Emotionally intelligent people cultivate this power not by outsmarting others, but by deeply understanding them. They observe, they listen, they make space between stimulus and response, and in that space they don't just react, they perceive. They've learned to spot manipulation in its softest forms, not just the obvious attacks, but the subtle guilt trips, the strategic silence, the backhanded compliments, the shifting goalposts in a conversation designed to make you feel like you're the problem. They don't need to call it out every time, they just register it, and then, calmly, intentionally, they act from that awareness, because emotional intelligence isn't naivety dressed in kindness, it's not blind trust. It's clarity with compassion, and when someone is operating from a toxic place, whether out of fear, insecurity, or control, emotionally intelligent people don't try to fix them. They don't take the behavior personally. Instead, they pay attention to what the behavior reveals. It's not about judging, it's about noticing. Noticing when someone shifts blame instead of taking responsibility. Noticing when the conversation always circles back to their wounds but never opens to yours. Noticing when kindness is conditional, when you're liked only when you're compliant, accepted only when you're quiet. This noticing is not about paranoia. It's not about walking around suspicious of everyone. It's about pattern recognition. And emotionally intelligent people recognize patterns, not excuses. It's tempting to rationalize toxic behavior, especially when it's wrapped in charm, humor, or shared history. But emotionally intelligent people understand that good memories don't excuse harmful patterns, that someone's pain doesn't give them a free pass to cause it, that love without accountability is not love, it's enabling. So they pause, they observe, they ask themselves the hard questions. Am I being respected or just tolerated? Is this person growing with me or am I shrinking for them? Am I mistaking intensity for intimacy? They know that toxic behavior often operates on a loop, and that loop survives on reaction. The moment you begin to respond instead of react, the loop loses power, the dynamic changes, you stop feeding it with your energy. You stop playing the role you've been cast in, you reclaim your agency, and here's something most people overlook. Emotionally intelligent people don't just study others, they study themselves. They're not immune to manipulation. No one is, but they've done the inner work. They've learned to recognize their own emotional patterns, their wounds, their triggers, their desires for approval, connection, or peace at any cost. That's what makes them discerning. That's what allows them to see clearly. They've learned that the desire to be liked can blind you to disrespect, that empathy without boundaries leads to burnout, that sometimes the person you most want to understand is the one who keeps you stuck in confusion. So they practice awareness, not judgment, not assumption, just quiet, consistent awareness. They ask, does this relationship make me feel more like myself or less? Am I walking on eggshells or am I walking in truth? And they trust the answers, not always instantly. Sometimes they wrestle with them. Sometimes they revisit them, but they don't ignore them. They don't silence their intuition just because it's inconvenient. It's a kind of emotional maturity that doesn't demand applause. It doesn't prove itself through confrontation or dominance. It simply chooses truth over illusion, self-respect over emotional chaos, peace over performative harmony. This kind of discernment isn't always obvious. You might see someone smiling, nodding, moving through the world with grace, and you'd never know that behind the scenes, they're making powerful choices about what they will and won't allow. That's the quiet strength of emotional intelligence. It doesn't need to broadcast its boundaries, it simply lives them. So when emotionally intelligent people navigate toxic behavior, they don't always confront it head on. Sometimes they just step back, they shift their energy, they reduce access. They don't fight for understanding from those committed to misunderstanding them. They don't exhaust themselves trying to explain what someone has no intention of hearing. Instead, they choose peace, but not the peace of avoidance, the peace of clarity. They've learned that discernment is a form of self-trust, that seeing clearly is a kind of freedom, and that the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to manipulate, confuse, or belittle you is not to fight them louder. It's to simply stop dancing to the rhythm they set and walk silently in the direction of your peace. There's a strange kind of grace in choosing stillness when everything around you demands a reaction. It feels counterintuitive, doesn't it? Especially in a world that tells you to speak louder, respond quicker, never let your guard down. But emotionally intelligent people understand something deeper. Not every battle is worth fighting, and not every offense deserves your energy. They've come to realize that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. But let's be clear, this isn't silence rooted in fear or avoidance. It's not the kind of silence that stems from not knowing what to say. It's the silence that grows from wisdom, from choosing presence over provocation, from valuing your peace more than proving your point. There's a kind of strength that lives in restraint, in the breath you take before speaking, in the space you give to your thoughts before letting them shape your words. Emotionally intelligent people have trained themselves to pause, not because they're passive, but because they've learned that presence is a strategy. And patience is power. When someone throws toxicity your way, when they twist words, push buttons, or bait you into reaction, it's easy to get caught in the trap, to defend yourself, to justify, to prove them wrong. But that's the hook, that's the game, and if you play it, even if you win, you still lose something, your center. Emotionally intelligent people have learned to notice that moment, that tightening in the chest, that heat rising behind the eyes, that sudden rush to respond. They recognize it as the moment of choice, the moment where they can either give away their peace or protect it. And often, they choose the quiet route, the high road, not out of superiority, but out of self-respect. You see, emotional intelligence doesn't mean you don't feel anger or pain. It means you don't let those emotions dictate your decisions. It means you recognize them, sit with them, and then decide from a place of calm clarity. It's not about suppression, it's about integration, and sometimes that clarity leads to disengagement, not out of spite, but because engagement would only fuel the very behavior you're trying to rise above. Toxic people feed off attention, your defense, your frustration, your attempts to make them see your side, but silence, that disarms them. It leaves no fire to burn. It returns you to your own rhythm instead of dancing to theirs. Emotionally intelligent people don't avoid difficult conversations. They welcome depth, truth, and even disagreement when it's respectful, when it's mutual, when it's safe. But when a conversation turns into a cycle of control, guilt, or emotional volatility, they don't waste time trying to fix what was never theirs to repair. Instead, they conserve their energy. They choose to respond in ways that preserve their dignity, sometimes with silence, sometimes with space, sometimes with a gentle but firm, "I'm not going to continue this conversation." And this takes courage, because many of us were conditioned to believe that walking away is weakness, that silence is surrender, but it's not. It's wisdom in motion. It's knowing the cost of constant conflict and choosing peace instead. This kind of discipline, the ability to pause, to choose your energy, to protect your emotional ecosystem, it's not glamorous, it doesn't get headlines, but it's what keeps emotionally intelligent people grounded in environments that try to uproot them. They understand that not everything requires their attention, that their worth isn't on trial every time someone misunderstands them, that not every wound needs defending, some just need healing, so they focus inward. They choose to work on what they can control, their mindset, their reactions, their boundaries, and they let the rest go. This isn't indifference, it's discernment. It's the quiet decision to place your energy where it can actually grow something good. It's the difference between reacting out of ego and responding from soul. Because here's the truth, not all battles are worthy of your fire. Some are just noise. Some are invitations to chaos dressed as conversation. And emotionally intelligent people have learned that the real art is not in winning those arguments. It's in knowing which ones to never step into in the first place.